Okay, I want to do an array of scores, another program. I want to create a new program that allows for unlimited scores to be entered. So this requires different logic. So it requires overall different logic because we need to be able to increase the length of the array. This means actually kind of creating a new array or copying the array and then increasing its length. So this is going to change the overall logic because we have to change the parameters that we pass. So I'm going to just start a new class, and we'll call it the same thing but 2. So score array 2. And then let's go ahead and put it up here. Maybe I won't calculate the average in this one. We'll just create the array, and we'll allow the array to increase in size however big it needs to get. So here's program creates user entered integer array with the ability for the length of the array to expand or grow. Okay. So we're going to need, obviously, we're going to need our scanner. So we're going to import java.utilities.everything, and that's also going to capture the arrays class methods. So that's going to make our life a little easier. We're going to need some methods. So let's go back over here, think about what we need. It's a little different in terms of the last example I had. We were counting how many things were in the array, and we were keeping track of that. Right now, I think, so there's an object called an Arraylist that we're going to look at next quarter, which essentially will do what we're trying to do here a little bit easier. So let's suppose we have this score array to begin with. And remember, it has a set number of values. So in this case, it's an integer array of length 5. And it has 5 zeros in it. And the user is going to enter an 80, and we're going to put an 80 in there. And then they're going to enter an 82, and we're going to put that in the next spot, etc. And then they're going to quit by entering like a -4. So one thing we could do to know that these zeros are not part of the data, since -4 can never be a data value, we could actually store that in the array. And so then our array would be 80, 82, and then let's say it's 90, and then they enter in a -4, and then there's the default 0. So what the -4 is doing is telling me, okay, that those are the scores they've entered only. And what this allows me to do is not have to count how many scores the user has entered. So what we're going to do is, if the user keeps going, 63 and 48, oh, they had a bad week, that would be 5. If they keep going, so if they're 5, then, well, so then they actually would have to enter another number, which would be -4 again, a negative number. And so what we're going to do is we're going to actually take our array and double its length. So we'll create a new array that creates a copy of this one, but then has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Really, we'll double it and we'll add 1. I don't know why we add the 1, but we do. It's a common algorithm. So, ooh, come on, no, I just want to erase that. So we'll double it and add 1. So now it'll have length, so that's 5 and 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And that 6th element will be the -4 that they entered. And that'll tell us, okay, there's actually only 5 elements in the list that we want to look at, or 5 scores entered. So the negative, we're now saving it in our array, and it's going to indicate the end of the data so that I don't have to know how many there are. I can process the data up until we hit the -4, and that'll tell us the data is done. Okay, so what this does for us is it means we don't have to return the how many things they've entered. We can actually just return the array from the get scores list, or get scores array. So in main, I no longer need to, well, let's see, do I want to define an array here? No, we'll just define the array as such. We'll go integer array equals, integer array, give it a name, score array. And we'll just have this method return that array, get scores. I think. Let's try it, see what happens. All right, so we'll jump back over to Eclipse, and we're just gonna have one method here. So we're gonna say integer array, score array equals get scores. And then we need to define that method get scores. Public, static, returning an integer array. It's called get scores. Parameters, and we set up a return statement. I'll just return, I think I can just do it like this, the array with a 1 in it. Nope, doesn't like that. Try to return an array with a 1 in it like that. Nope, doesn't like that. So we'll set up an integer array here. Call it score array. Initially, we'll set it up to be a new integer array of size 5. And then we'll return that score array. Okay, so it wasn't liking that. I was returning sort of a non-array. So here's the array that we're returning. And then how does the logic gonna work? So we're gonna call another method called getScore to get our scores. And we're gonna do that while similar to the last one. So let me just grab that code first. So I'm going to jump back here to score array, and I'm going to, I don't really need count, but I want sort of this code. I want count or not? Count. Size, we could call it size. We do want it still, it's gonna help us, but we're not gonna return it. So I'm gonna copy that code and paste it in here. So I'm just stealing the logic here. So you could start retyping. We're gonna have an integer called size, which is gonna represent how many things we have in our thing. And then we're gonna call a method called getScore. And then while the size is less than 5, we're going to change this logic. This doesn't make sense. So this doesn't really make sense. So let's just undo all of that. And let's go back to here. So now I'm in get score. And come on. I'm in the method get scores. And I've defined my score array. It's an integer array up to length 5. So let's have a size starting off at 0. And we're going to say if the size is less than score array dot length, I feel like that might need to be within the while loop. So we're going to say while all right, so this is a little tricky. So we need to get the first score. So let me just kind of re-look at this for a second. So we're in this method that's building the array. So we're calling that, I think I called it get scores with an S on the end. And inside this get scores, you know, we do have this integer array that we've defined to have length 5. So I need to get one score first. So we're gonna go ahead and call that method get singular score, and that's gonna return an integer always. So as soon as we do that, as soon as we have that integer, I'm gonna say size equals 1. This size is just gonna be temporary inside this method. So size equals 1, and then as long as the size is less than this length. Not what I want. While the score is greater than 0, greater than or equal to 0. If that's a positive score, we're going to put it in the list. So that's score array, or put it in the array, excuse me. And that's going to be at the position size. Let's make the size, make the size 1 there, it's fine. Size minus 1, so that if it's the first size, it'll go in the 0th spot. That equals that score. We'll increase the size. So I think maybe I'd rather start at size 0 here. And then I don't need to subtract 1 in there. So now size is literally what I had before as count. So now, as I increase the size, so initially our array can accept 5 items. Okay. So while the score is positive, put it in the thing and then increase the size. And then in here, I'm going to say if the size is greater than or equal to the length. then I want to increase the length of the score array so that I can continue to put stuff in there. And then this loop will continue. I think we then want to put that negative score into the list so that we don't go past the 0. So I think the last thing I want to do here is I want to put that negative score into the array at, I think it's still at the size position equals the score. So that'll be the last score, and this guy is going to be the negative value that's telling them that that's the last value, or that we don't have any more positive values. Okay, so I'm going to try this logic. I'm not 100% sure, but I think it's going to work. Okay, so in get scores, we need, let's maybe make this smaller, and then I can have this kind of open up at the same time. We need to set the size to 0 and get an initial score. Or get an initial score and then set the size to 0. So integer score get a score. I'm going to steal that method from the previous example. And then let's set up an integer size equal to 0. So I'm going to jump over to the previous example, and I'm going to borrow this method that returns an integer value. So it's robust. It makes sure that the user has entered an actual integer, and if not, it asks them for another one. So that's going to go after get scores here. Okay, so there's that method. I stole it from the other example. You can pause it if you need it. And then back up here, we will continue with our logic, which now we are going to enter the while loop while the score is positive or greater than or equal to 0. What do we want to do? We want to put the score in the array in the size position or size index. So we're going to go score array index size equals that score. Then we want to increase the size. Then I want to check if that new size is too big. So if size is greater than the length, I'm not sure if I need a greater than or a greater than or equal to here. And it's score array. No parentheses after that, so it's a little bit weird. Let's figure out if it should be a greater than or a greater than or equal to. So it goes in as size is 0, and you store the first thing, size increases to 1. It scores the next thing, size increases to 2. Saves the next thing, size increases to 3. Saves it, size increases to 4. So that last thing that goes in there is an index 4, and then size increases to 5. And that's when we want to increase the array. So and the length is also 5. So we want it to be greater than or equal to the length. Okay. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use an arrays. So how are we going to increase the length of this score array? We are going to create a copy. So we're going to say score array, the array that I'm starting with. I want to reassign it to a new array, and I'm going to get that by using the arrays class. Arrays.copyOf. I want to copy the original array, which is score array. And the new length, I'm going to take the value of twice the length that we're at, score array dot length, and I'm going to increase that by 1. So what this is going to do is it's going to create a copy of the array that we have and essentially double the length plus 1, and then score that save that into that score array. And so this is why I have to do this. I had to return this score array here, because if I'm actually changing the length of this array, creating a copy, it doesn't save that that would be a new array. That would not be saved in a global aspect like we did when we just changed the entries in the array. So this actually creates a new pointer. It changes the pointer of score array to now point to this copy thing that we just created, this new array. We're creating a new array and we're changing where it points to, which is why in this method I want to actually be returning the array. Okay, and then I know that logic's a little confusing, and we don't have, we learn more about it next quarter. So it's a little hard to cover here because we get to see the difference when we see something else. Okay, so that increases the length, and then we're going to get another score. After that if statement, we'll get another score, get score. And then we want to return that score array. And then we want to do some testing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to not have a length of 5 initially, but just a length of 2. So that if I enter more than 2 integers, it should double the length, and then I should be able to enter up to 5 integers. And the way I want to check this, again, I'm pausing here, so if you want to pause and get this code down, you can. The way I'm going to check this is I'm going to use the arrays.toString method to print it back in main. And I'm doing this to save time. There is a way just to loop through this array and print the elements out. I actually want to see the default zeros, and I want us to see how the last score is going to be negative, and that would be something that you could then tell how to stop when your data is no longer, where is the place they've entered the last score that we want to keep track of. Okay, so we're going to run this. First, let's just enter nothing. So that didn't work. So this didn't work because I should have a -5 here. But let's try entering something else. I have a feeling that I've done something that's not allowed, but let's see what happens. Let's try entering 80 and then quit. Okay, kept the 80, good. Let's try entering, oh, I know why, because the while, it never went into the while. Let's try entering 90 and 80 and then quit. And so now, because I entered in 2 things, so notice it's not entering the negative value here, which is what I wanted it to enter in that -9. So let's look down and see why that's not happening. And the reason I want that -9 is I want to be able to distinguish between an entry of 0 that could be a valid score, or an entry, or the 0 that's the default. Oh, I know, I see why. I didn't follow my pseudocode, which after I run that while loop, I didn't do it. I thought it was this last line. That just gets the score. After the while loop ends, I have to put that score back in my list, back in my array. So I never did that. Score array in position size, again, equals score. This logic's a little bit weird, but I want that loop to run while the score they've entered is positive, and then I want to put one more thing in, that negative value, so that I know when the data stops. So now if I enter a negative number, that tells me there's actually nothing in this array that we want to keep track of. And now I think it's working. Let's try 80, 98, 100. So that 60. So this, I already anticipate that so I'm entering the 5th thing, and so I should get an array size that doubles and adds 1, so it should be size 11. Nope, not yet. It'll be the next one, hopefully, that does it on. Let's try it. Right, because the length is 6 now. The length is 5. So the 80, 90, oops. 80, 90, 90, 70, that's 4. Add one more 80. Now I've entered 5 in, but it still needs to save this -5. So I've used up all my spaces, and now it's going to double the length of the list to 10, and then add 1, make it 11. And there it is. So there's my array. It has, notice I keep saying list. They're similar. In fact, in next quarter, you're going to look at what are called array lists that does this exact thing for you. So it takes your original array, and as needed, it increases the size to whatever you need it to be. And we're actually going to write code that does that. This is kind of a precursor to that. So it's good practice for next quarter. So we have our first 5 entries, and then that -5 would indicate that the data has stopped, and these are all the default values. And again, if I entered in a 12th data, or if I entered in 11, with the 12th one being a negative value, it would again double the length to 22 and add 1, 23. Okay, so I think that's that code. Again, where I use this print statement, I could also have just taken that out. Let's just call a method, output array. We'll send it the score array. And so I'll show you how I could use this negative value to stop printing. So down here, we'll have a method called static. I'm accepting an integer array, and I'm just going to call it score array as well. Parameter here. And I'm doing this instead of using the array's automated print method. I'm going to write my own. So if I want to print the entire array, I can say start with the first element, the bracket, I'm going to add to that the first element in the array, which should be score array bracket 0. And then we'll run a loop for integer I equals 1, I less than score array dot length. Again, with the array plus, the length method does not have the option for parameters. It's just no parentheses after the word length, whereas a string is dot length with parentheses. Okay, and then here we're going to print. This is a fence post problem, so we'll print score array bracket I, and we'll add to that a comma. Let's see. In front of it, we need the comma and the space. In front of this, we print comma, space, plus that. So it prints the 0th element, then it prints a comma, space, the next one, comma, space, the next one, comma, space, the next one, up to when the last one prints. Typos here. Array, there we go. And then outside the loop, we could have a print line statement that prints the last bracket. There we go. And I should be able to run that. And so I'll do like somewhere in the middle, in the way I'll enter in like 4 scores. So 80, 90, 86, and 82. And then my 5th score will be a -9. And there's my array, the 4 valid scores followed by the negative score. If I run it again and I enter in a 5th score, say 80, 60, 96, 95, 82, 78, 90, followed by a -6. I should have some zeros at the end. Yep, because I have valid scores. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 valid scores. The -6 says to stop, and these are my invalid scores. So you could envision the same thing where we have a while loop that says while that score is not negative, run the loop. Let's see. So this would be, let's do another one. I'll call it output array 2. I'll pass in score array again. And what I want to do is I want to have a method that only prints the valid scores. So it only goes up to the negative number and stops. So I'm going to create a new method. It still has an integer array as a parameter. Okay, so now if there's an empty array, I just want to have it print an open and a closed bracket. So I'm not going to print the 0th element with the first bracket. An empty array, it doesn't have anything in it, will just print the open and closed bracket. So I need to print the first one by itself. Then I can say sort of if, let's think about the logic for a second. So I'm going to go back to paper and just kind of look at how this would work. See, there's a couple of options. If you just had a -8 there, the output should just be nothing. If it was an 80 followed by a -8, then you would just followed by this. So you don't really just have a -8. You have a -8 and another 0 after it. Here you'd have a -8 followed by 3 more zeros after it. But that should just print the 80. And if I had a few scores, 80, 90, 68, then the -8, that would print the 80 and then the comma and the 90, the comma and the 68, and then the close. So then, as long as there's more than one score, it will always print the comma and the next score. So the first score, as long as the first thing's not negative, you can just print the 80. And then if the next, as long as the next score is not negative, you're going to print a comma and the next score. Okay. So in our method, maybe we have that on the side. I can kind of see it. Notice the logic here. I'm actually figuring this out on paper because it's really hard to code this correctly. We always need that brace. And then we're going to say if we want the first score to not be negative. So if score array 0 is greater than or equal to 0, then we'll print that out. And now we will go into a loop. Right after that, that says for integer I, no, let's not do a for loop. Let's do a while loop. It says while let's make integer I equal to 1 to prime the while loop. And we'll say while score array bracket I is greater than or equal to 0. We'll print that out. Not print lines, I'm just using print. Score array bracket I. And this will this will start the next element. So let's look back at our list. So if the first thing is negative, we're never going to get in here because of this if statement. So the first element is not negative. We get in, it prints it. 80 prints right here. And then I goes from 0 to 1. So now the first position is here. And if that's negative, the next part of the loop won't happen. If it's not negative, I actually want to print not just the 90, but I want to print comma space, then 90. So in here, I want to quote, comma space, unquote, plus that guy. And now the problem is this I is going to stay at 1. It's going to keep printing 90 unless I advance I right here, because I'm not using a for loop, I'm using a while loop. So then I'm going to advance I, and if the next score is not negative, it's going to print it out and advance I. And then if it is negative there, it kicks out of this while loop. And I want to kick out of the while loop, and I want to kick out of the if statement, and then I want to just print line statement, the closed bracket. Okay, so two different types of ways to print this array, depending on whether we want to print the whole thing, including the negative they entered and the defaults, or whether we just want to print up to, like, say, the 90 here. And now let's run it. And again, think about the testing. I would want to test it with nothing, like, okay, oh yeah, that worked, because I printed the first array and then I printed the empty array. Maybe I'll hide that. I don't need to hide the first array. As long as we know it's printing, it's fine. So that one worked. Run it again with 1 entry, followed by a negative. That worked. Run it again with 2 entries, followed by a negative. 80 and 90, and then, so it actually expanded the list. We can see it, but we're not having to see it in our second output function. So this is like, what happens is that underneath our list, our array is longer, but we only need to see the data that we want. So that's what we're doing there. So 80, 90, 90, let's make sure it can expand again. 70, 82, and 98. I'll enter negative. So I'm just entering enough numbers to force it to expand again, and it did. That's the original print output statement, and then here's the new one that just prints the positive values. Okay, so that's it. I'll leave those. Here's the 2 output array methods. There's some tricky logic here. So you might want to try doing this without looking at this code again, just to sort of see, or, you notice in here, this logic in output array 2, I did not figure this out while I was coding. I had to stop and look at some actual values that could happen and see what I would want those outputs to look like. And that comes with a lot of experience, and it comes with practice. So it does improve to help you do it if you kind of see someone else do it first, but then it's helpful for you to try to figure this type of thing out on your own. That, and also the original one that's just printing it out. Also, because both of these are involving a fence post idea, that there's one less comma than there are data elements. Okay, so there's the two outputs. You can pause if you need them. I'll scroll back up for main. Or get score, that came from the other version. Get scores is where we doubled the size of the array. So there's those two methods together if you wanted them. And I'll still scroll back up to get main. There's those two methods. Pause if you need. And then there's main.